Military build-up in the Balkans. NATO and Russia arm old rivals. Is a new arms race on the horizon? Also on today's program, a goalkeeper who killed his girlfriend walks free and gets right back to playing football. Is Brazil doing enough to tackle domestic violence? And in picture this, Nowruz Mobarak. We go around the region to celebrate the Persian New Year. I'm Imran Garda and this is the Newsmakers. When tensions brew in the Balkans, the world should take notice. A single bullet in Sarajevo paved the way for World War I, and much of the 20th century was scarred by violence in the region. Now, old foes Croatia and Serbia are bolstering their arsenals, with one looking to the west and the other to Russia for its defense needs. Are these just overdue upgrades to old weapon systems, or is there something more going on? Well, depending on who you ask, you could hear fears of an arms race, with both former socialist republics looking to out-equip the other. Some say those fears are overblown, often by opportunistic politicians looking to further their own agendas. But there is growing debate over whether accumulating heavy weapons risks inflaming geopolitical rivalries. Our newsmaker today is the build-up in the Balkans, as we ask if they are legitimate concerns and whether they're setting the scene for a future standoff between NATO and Russia.
The Balkans are in a deep security crisis because of the past conflicts. None of these conflicts have been brought to an end on paper.
The Russian Federation has been very active in this part of southwestern Europe, which is still kind of a former crisis point.
When there is conflict in Bosnia and Herzegovina, very quickly it becomes a widespread military conflict.
An ongoing rivalry between Serbia and Croatia is sparking a debate over a potential arms race. While Croatia is looking to procure artillery and missile systems from NATO next year, Serbia is upgrading its arms thanks to Russia. Nationalist agendas between the two countries are playing out in tabloid media. A psychological threat echoed to each country, and a rise in radical politics have raised concerns about how the arms might be used.
The real truth is they're creating a picture of fear. The politicians create the image of themselves as the saviours of their own people. The Balkans arms race doesn't really exist. It's a picture painted by the media by the help of politicians and political elites.
More than 2 decades since the post-Yugoslav conflicts of the 1990s, the region is still facing ethnic tensions.
It is really a cauldron that is simmering from within, and the international efforts were actually calming it down. Now, as they somewhat weakened, the fire is getting stronger again, so the bubbling is more visible.
There's increasing unease between ethnic Serbs and Albanians in Kosovo and Macedonia. Bosnian Serbs are pushing for independence, and Croatia saw a 60% rise in hate speech threats and violence towards Serb Croats in 2016. Here in downtown Zagreb, comedy is being used as a vehicle for change. Journalist turned comedian Peja Bojovic hopes his punchlines
Why would you want to live in Scotland?
will get people voting. He feels there's a bigger game at play.
More weapon, more threat. Simple as that. I mean, I don't think that there's a real political will among the local players to engage into any kind of a conflict. But if the big ones say, oh, look at them, it might happen.
Belgrade's decision to deepen military cooperation with Russia caused controversy in Brussels. Ties between the two countries have a long-standing history. Serbia remains heavily dependent on Russian energy exports. Vladimir Putin has warned that legitimising Kosovo's independence would destabilise the international system. The two countries share deep cultural and religious ties. The EU is attempting to stabilise the region through a cession of more Balkan states. It offers financial support and investment and is encouraging a peaceful coexistence. Yet the bloc is losing credibility in the region, and the US is quiet on policy, leaving a vacuum Russia seems eager to fill.
I believe Russia has pragmatic and short-term interests in the region. Destabilising the region might be Russia's biggest political interest, because a crisis in the Balkans can compromise European efforts.
During our journey through the Balkans, we've heard warning signs of what could happen should history repeat itself. Many here say that just one provocation could spark bloodshed across the region. Sarajevo's conflict-scarred buildings are just a reminder of the time it takes to rebuild homes, lives and dreams. But it's people who pay the highest price. In Serbia, Croatia and here in Bosnia, there's a resounding sentiment. War is business, and arms manufacturers and corrupt politicians wouldn't think twice about putting you and your family into an early grave. Sally Ihan, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now by Montenegro's former foreign minister and ambassador Miodrag Vlahovic from the capital Podgorica. So thank you very much for joining us. So we're seeing that Russia is arming Serbia. Are you comfortable with that?
Absolutely okay with that. I don't believe that that is an issue in regard to Montenegro, neither in regard to the whole region. I think that is the entirely or dominantly an internal issue in Serbia. The forthcoming presidential elections are there, and people are actually fighting for the position of the chief of state, chief of Serbia, and president of Serbia, through the, of course, continuous attempt to make relations with Russia to look at as good as possible.
There are those who see a pattern here. So they see NATO giving arms to Croatia, and then soon afterwards, Russia giving Serbia fighter jets, tanks, combat vehicles. Is that a wrong pattern for people to be seeing?
First of all, let me emphasize that I am not a military or security kind of expert. What is important here, I think that the hotbeds and the potential crisis areas in the Western Balkan region as such are primarily Bosnia, Kosovo, and Macedonia, or in reverse order, Macedonia, Kosovo, and Bosnia. I don't believe that there could be a military conflict or crisis of that nature in between Croatia on one and Serbia on the other side. The stakes are too high, these two, to enter into any kind of serious conflict in foreseeable future. Although this is the Balkans, you cannot say never.
NATO wanting anyone other than Serbia in the region to become a member. Do you accept the Russian?
Anyone? Yeah, anyone but Montenegro, you mean, or Serbia?
In addition to Montenegro, but then other than Serbia, because Serbia and Russia are natural allies. Would you understand the Russian perspective that this is sort of throwing dirt in their faces and that it's encroaching upon their sphere of influence?
If I understood you correctly, first of all, there is no such a thing as natural allies, first of all. These are interests, you know. I mean, recently we have seen how this pendulum can go from one side to the other in the context of Russian-Turkish relations in a matter of a couple of months, if I'm not mistaken. First. Second, we here in the Balkans, we have a situation which is complicated and complex on one side, and on the other, it's rather simple. Montenegro is very close to enter NATO as a full-fledged member. We have only the US Senate and the Dutch and Spanish friends to finalize their procedures. On one side, we have quite a volatile situation in Macedonia and in Bosnia, and we have this ongoing conflict, which is a low-profile conflict and misunderstanding, which is natural, maybe. I can use that word in the context of Serbia and Kosovo relations. So I believe that big players, the Russian Federation has become one, or has regained the position of the global player in last 10 years or so. They are actually looking what they could do in given situation to preserve their interests in our region. So Montenegro is almost, we are almost there, and I was one of the people who actually advocated the idea of our NATO membership in all these years, and I'm pretty glad that we are so close, and I do believe and hope we shall finalize the process. But on the other side, you have, with due respect to our friends in Macedonia and in Bosnia and in Kosovo, you have open situations there. Nobody can predict with enough level of certainty what could occur there in years to come.
Let me ask my other question in a slightly different way, because you talk about,
yes,
natural allies and you pour cold water over that. When they conducted a military exercise, the Serbs and the Russians both called it Operation Slavic Brotherhood. Doesn't that concern you? It sounds very ideological.
I think it's a natural name because they are both Slavs, or dominantly Slavs, because we should not forget we have a considerable percentage of Muslim people, legitimate and completely normal ones, living in both countries, both in Russian Federation on one side and in Serbia on the other. Serbia is a very specific and peculiar, both internal and international situation. The country has an issue with Western orientation, has an issue with NATO, with Western allies. There was a continuous 4 wars, which are, if I may say, lost by Serbia in the last 15 years or so in ex-Yugoslavia. Very tragic, actually, and very, I would say, negative and destructive events. Croatia, Bosnia, Kosovo, and the NATO intervention as such, which they don't call intervention in that way still. So actually the access or the communication and cooperation with Russia is logical, not necessarily natural, because I believe that logical is better on one side. But, there is also a kind of balance or Serbian leadership, primarily Prime Minister Vučić, but some other people as well, are trying to maintain some kind of balance, not actually losing the connection to the West. Recently, Mr. Vučić, not only in the context of the presidential campaign, but as a part of his regular duties, he actually met Chancellor Merkel in Berlin, and he was supported. So the situation is still open there, although Russia has the biggest influence in Serbia. Whether it's good or bad for Serbia, it's not for us from Montenegro, from Karadak, to actually discuss.
Is it unfair for people to look at what's happening in the Balkans and the fact that there are some tensions? Of course, there's no major trouble, but there's some tensions and they're bubbling. For people to look at it and see it as a microcosm of the tensions between NATO and Russia?
This time I will support your paradigm. I will support your metaphor. When you read this famous book, Diplomacy, which was written by Henry Kissinger, it's a very thick book, some kind of 800 pages or so. Actually, and it's for the European and global diplomacy from Richelieu, Cardinal Richelieu on. Almost three quarters of that book is directly or indirectly about the Balkans. Even in that period, Balkans was actually a part of the game on global scene. Now the confrontation in between the two, the regained and renewed power called the Russian Federation on one side and Western countries, primarily United States on the other. There are different points in this globe, different places where there is a friction, a confrontation, and Balkans has emerged again as a playground for this kind of confrontation. Some people are afraid. Recently, there were some rumors and ideas and interpretations that there could be some kind of new sphere of interest division in between the two, that the game is on, that conflict is here. And I must admit that there are some elements of that situation. Here in Montenegro, we had quite a dramatic situation during our last elections, parliamentary elections, which were held October last year. Now we have the state prosecutor, the special state prosecutor in Montenegro is actually preparing the case against some opposition leaders, which allegedly, and it seems to be the case, actually certainly had some connections in Moscow and some other countries, trying to prepare some kind of coup d'etat here, some kind of actually to disrupt the process and to topple the government in Montenegro. And of course, as a means to stop and to block our orientation and membership towards NATO and membership in NATO. Yeah. Because the issue now in Montenegro is whether Montenegro and when Montenegro will become a NATO member. The issue in Bosnia, whether Bosnia can be kept all together as one country, which we in Montenegro would like to see for years and decades and centuries to come, one country, one Bosnia and Herzegovina, whether Serbia could resolve a long-standing and very painful relationship with Kosovo as an independent country, which, by the way, was recognized by Montenegro among the first, and at the end, or at the beginning, if you want, a very dramatic and even chaotic situation to some extent in Macedonia. That was a very dramatic and negative development up to 2008, and now we see that the country is in a very opposition, and the former government forces are in a absolutely open and direct friction and conflict, which is very negative, not only for Macedonia, because and that is maybe to finalize the answer to your question, Balkans, we are all interconnected, although we are different to some extent, very different and specific depending on certain issues, but we are interconnected, and the situation as such is interconnected. So no one can harm the unity of Bosnia without having a reflection of that, I believe, impossible scenario, or the scenario which will not occur in the context of Kosovo-Serbian relations, or in the context of the territorial integrity of Macedonia. Or no one can claim the possibility, how to say, to disrupt stability of Montenegro, although we are the smallest among the countries mentioned before, without having direct negative consequences in our neighborhood.
Okay, Ambassador Miodrag Vlahovic, I enjoyed talking to you. Hope to have you on the program again. Thanks so much for joining us. Brazilians love their football stars, but for many, the release of a convicted killer was just too much. Fan favorite Bruno Fernandes de Souza had been imprisoned for ordering the murder of his girlfriend. But he's been let out 16 years early, and a club has already snatched him up. It's unleashed a nationwide debate on whether existing domestic violence laws are too weak in a country where a woman is killed every 2 hours. Yvette McCullough reports.
A convicted killer allowed to walk free and return to the football pitch. Bruno Fernandes de Souza was a popular rising star of Brazilian football. In 2010, he was convicted of the murder of his girlfriend, Elisa Samudio. She fell pregnant to Bruno and refused to get an abortion. She then sued him for child support payments. On his orders, she was abducted, tortured, and strangled to death, and her body fed to his dogs. Bruno confessed and was sentenced to 22 years in prison. But after serving just 6 years, he's been released while the court considers his appeal. He's now been welcomed back to football with a contract with second-tier club Boa Esporte.
Why do you deserve to wear the soccer club's shirt so soon after being convicted of such a barbaric crime?
I am not going to respond to that question.
From today, I am only going to talk about Bruno, the football player. We are only going to talk about football.
The club says Bruno deserves a second chance, and many fans agree.
I'm in favor of him returning and reintegrating back into society.
It's an opportunity for him to restart his life, to go in the right path and show he can be better.
But his release and return to football has sparked outrage across Brazil, and several sponsors have pulled their support for the club.
As women, as activists, as human beings, this news saddens us. We are against a team that recruits someone who committed a femicide, and even if he's out of prison, he's still facing legal proceedings.
Brazil is considered one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a woman. At least 2,000 women are killed by partners, former partners or relatives every year. In 2013, Brazil had the highest female homicide rate in the world, an average of 1 woman killed every 2 hours. Last year marked a decade since the introduction of the Maria da Penha law on domestic and family violence. Named after an activist and victim of domestic violence, the landmark law established special courts and stricter sentences for offenders and offered more tools for prevention and support. While there was some improvement in cities in those 10 years, overall, lethal violence against women in Brazil increased by 24%, raising concern that the law isn't being properly implemented and that Brazil's police and justice system still aren't working for victims. Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
To discuss this, I'm joined by Cesar Munoz from Sao Paulo. He's the senior researcher for Brazil at Human Rights Watch. Cesar, thanks so much for joining us. How was this allowed to happen? Because so many people are so shocked by this story.
Yes, it's absolutely shocking, and it's really, I feel, a disgrace for Brazil. I mean, we have this man who was convicted of a horrendous crime, and he only spent, less than 7 years in prison for that. And I have the feeling, because of the reaction here, that this reflects an idea that is ingrained in Brazilian society, which is that men who abuse women are not really criminals. The idea of criminal here is somebody who is, selling drugs on the street. But men who abuse women are not considered, that's not considered so serious an offense. But, these men, they are really destroying Brazilian families. Their violence is having a tremendous impact on women and also on children who witness or suffer that violence.
Mm-hmm. So, there's talk of sexism, domestic violence, misogyny, but I wonder, is this less about that and more just about a really lousy justice system where this guy only served 6 years and he's out on a technicality?
Well, the Brazilian justice system is not perfect. It has a lot of problems. But I do a lot of research on criminal justice in Brazil, and the failure that I see that is the most serious is before it gets there. I mean, and this case shows it. Elisa Samudio, the woman who was killed in this case, she went to the police before that happened. In October 2009. And she filed a police report. She said that Bruno, the goalkeeper, had threatened her, that he had given her abortive substances, and they took a test of her urine at the time, but they never did the test. I mean, it took them 8 months to do the test, and by the time they got the results, she was already killed. A judge denied a protective order for her at the time. So, I mean, we see how the justice system failed to protect her and to treat her with dignity.
Yeah, that's important that you mentioned that, some important background information. Let me pose a hypothetical to you here. So you have Bruno involved in the killing of Elisa Samudio, and it's a horrible situation. He was a part of ordering the killing. They fed her body to the dogs and so on. If he had served the 22 years of his sentence and then he came out and Boa Esporte signed him up as the goalkeeper, would that be okay?
I think that would be fine, actually. I mean, I wouldn't hire him, personally, but, because I think because of this really huge problem of killing of women in Brazil. But he has not served his sentence, and not only that, he has in the interviews that he has given after he was released, he has not even recognized any participation. He said he didn't think he made a mistake. He said that he had suffered a lot in prison, which I don't doubt, because prisons in Brazil are really horrible. But he never mentioned the suffering of Elisa Samudio or her family. So this is a man who had not recognized what he did, or who thinks that what he did was not that serious, and that's outrageous.
And is that why so many Brazilians are so upset? Because if you look at him, you look at Boa Esporte on social media, they have pictures with him and the coach and the chairman, and he's doing his gym work as he's preparing to be the goalkeeper for the season ahead. Is that stuff rubbing it in the faces of the Brazilian people and particularly enraging them?
See, I mean, this is very interesting, the reaction to his hiring. I mean, there is definitely a section of society who sees that as a slap on the face of women in the country. And this is a country, is one of the most dangerous countries for women in the world. I mean, it has the 5th highest rate of killings of women in the world. So in that context, yeah, it's very serious. But you also see fans who go to take pictures with him, selfies, and who support him in the stadium and so forth. And I see that as part of this culture where violence against women is admitted as something that is even normal, and we have to change that, because, you know, as long as you consider these kind of crimes, as serious as this one was, as something that is accepted culturally, you know, it's not going to change.
Cesar, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for helping us understand the story a bit more deeply. I've been around for, I guess 14 years in this industry. I still haven't come across, I've never come across a story like this before. It's fascinating and unnerving. Cesar, good to talk to you. Thanks so much. In today's Picture This, many countries around the world are celebrating the New Year, known as Nowruz. Let's take a look. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.